Moving on, United States Secretary of State Anthony Blinken promising to investigate the UN Relief and Works Agency, or UNRWA, for its continuous and progressively anti-Semitic content taught to Palestinians in UNRWA's school curriculum. And Blinken testifying before a Senate committee, likewise saying that D.C. will condition further aid to UNRWA on related material reforms. But all this in light of a report released by the independent educational watchdog Impact SE in January, the first ever review of UNRWA's teaching materials. And here to give us more is CEO of Impact SE, Marcus Sheff. Marcus, thanks so much for joining us again. How closely have you been working with the White House, and do you believe Blinken, and by extension the Biden administration, to be sincere in pushing for these reforms?
Thank you. Yes, we have been working with the State Department on this issue. That is to say, we briefed them, and at their request, we sent policy recommendations in relation to UNRWA education. But I think this is a really important moment. Mr. Blinken presented that State Department budget to Congress, and he acknowledged very clearly that UNRWA's educational materials contain anti-Semitism. He called out, and I quote, the abuse of the system, and said that the U.S. is determined that UNRWA pursue those very necessary reforms. So, this is really an important moment. These comments constitute the first time that this administration has acknowledged that UNRWA's educational content does contain hate, does contain extremism, does contain anti-Semitism.
All right, now, Blinken also alluded to looking into the measures that UNRWA says it's taking to address these concerns. Do you know what these measures include?
Well, there has always been a veil of uncertainty around UNRWA's statements in relation to the measures that they are taking. It has never been clear. And, for several years now, UNRWA have, made these statements about the various different mechanisms that they have in place in order to look at the curriculum. And unfortunately, not one of these mechanisms has ever stood the light of investigation. They are, all kinds of platforms which don't make sense. Ultimately, their own vetted teachers are the ones who created material which is, hateful. And, when I say hateful, I'm talking about students being called upon to defend the motherland with blood. Students being directed to learn about, terrorists and glorification of terrorists. They are, in this material, role models. People like Dalal Mughrabi, who, as you know, murdered 38 people, including 13 children, on a civilian bus. And Israel, which is a UN member state, and UNRWA is, of course, a UN organization, is wiped off all UNRWA-produced material. So, whatever possible platforms they might or might not have, and as I say, none of these platforms have ever stood investigation in the light of day, they're clearly not working. We know that UNRWA's own director in Gaza said there is nothing wrong with the material which we get from the Palestinian Authority and which we teach children. So, I think what we really need here is an external audit. I think the idea that UNRWA... Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to add to what you were saying, because in a statement of yours that you've previously made, you said that, quote, despite telling donor countries for years that it combats incitement in the Palestinian textbooks, in fact, UNRWA's own content is even worse than that of the Palestinian Authority. Where does the buck stop? You mentioned Palestinian teachers and the Palestinian Authority in charge of the curriculum. Where's the oversight in the curriculum?
Well, clearly there isn't any. There are two, if you like, elements of materials here. One is the Palestinian curriculum, which UNRWA teaches unredacted, despite all claims that they make that they do actually change that curriculum. There's no evidence it's ever been done. And the other, as I said before, was UNRWA's own created material that was created during the COVID era, which in parts is worse than the Palestinian curriculum itself. And after this came to light, after we did the research and we put that research out showing the materials that UNRWA are producing, UNRWA provided no evidence whatsoever of when they identified hateful material, because they say that they did, when an internal review, which they said took place, actually took place, what they found. No evidence whatsoever that UNRWA has said what it found in this internal review they say took place about which we have no evidence. It goes on and on. So, again, UNRWA clearly is not capable, does not, will not regulate itself. And there is an absolute need for an external audit of UNRWA's educational materials. Because in answer to your question, the buck doesn't stop with UNRWA. The buck stops with those donor countries who are giving that money to UNRWA in the expectation that children will be educated and not incited to hate and violence.
All right, Marcus Sheff, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.